Good afternoon, children, evening. It is late. I just got off of work. As you may have noticed already, my surroundings are a bit different. I am house sitting for my parents right now. So today, since I am just getting started in the whole booktube community, I just wanted to talk a bit more about my journey through reading, because honestly, I think it's a really important thing to know about where a person's come from in reading to see where they are now. They aren't exactly my favorites, they are just sort of milestones on my journey through reading. I'm really excited to share this with you guys today. So I actually got a late start in reading. Let me take that back. I got a late start in reading books. I started school in a very conservative Christian private school, and we weren't allowed to read anything but the Bible. But at 4 years old, I learned to read faster than anybody. I started school early, and I was actually tutoring the first graders on how to read because I just loved it so much. My eyes devoured everything I came across until I started concerning my parents because I had started writing as well. Because all I could write and draw were like bloody crucifixion scenes and beheadings. So whenever I was finally out of there and homeschooled, my mom took me to our local library to start picking up stuff. I was really excited about this. I tried to get everything I could. I remember Junie B. Jones being the first thing I always came back for, and then that evolved a bit more into mystery stuff. I read a lot of Boxcar Children. I read a lot of Nancy Drew. Sadly, I don't have any examples to show you on that. I'm sure they're all things you've heard of before. Honestly, they're not things I'd personally read again, so if I ever went back and bought those books, it'd probably be for my children way, way down the road. My gosh. I guess the first book that really got me into fantasy and more descriptively written novels, like longer and that kind of stuff, was Inkheart. This one was the very first book I remember being left in suspense by. I didn't know a thing about this going in. I think the library copy I had at the time, obviously this is not the same copy, did not have the back of the book. It didn't have a description or anything, and I remember just getting into this and this having like the most suspenseful of an opening. It was just so mysterious, and it really drawed me in. And it really drew me in. Even after the years, my opinions on it have changed a bit, but it can never really take away that initial suspense that it held for me and that initial desire to find out what's going to happen next. Basically, Inkheart is about a girl named Maggie and her father Mo, and they are book doctors, which means they go around and they fix old books, and their lives are completely surrounded by books. But Maggie has never heard her father read out loud, and that is because he has a special power where whenever he reads things, things come to life, like from the book. I remember Mo, which is the father of the book, being my first literary crush because of just how much he loved books and took care of them, which is a very, very weird first book crush now that I think about it. But hey, it was mine. This book definitely still holds a very dear place in my heart, and I still go back to it anytime I want to rekindle that sense of wonder. If you haven't read it yet, I definitely recommend it. It's not going to be perfect. It is a middle grade book, and there are some flaws in it, some continuity errors throughout the series, but it's still very beautiful, and it paints a beautiful world. It has a lot of creativity to it. I definitely recommend it. And then next, I guess, is the first book to really bring out real emotion for me, and that was a book series. And I remember this being the very first series that ever made me cry, and that was The Chronicles of Narnia. I have The Magician's Nephew, which not only is the first book chronologically in the series, but it's also my favorite. I think it's just a wonderful example of everything that Narnia is, which is a true heartfelt story about so many different people, all connected by having visited this one place. Every single time I go back to read it, it recaptures all of the wonder and the magic of the world that I still think is so brilliantly made. And I go back to reread these all the time. Still one of my favorite series. And honestly, I can't think of anything else to say about it that hasn't been said. I feel like everybody adores this book series. And it's just one that's gonna stand the test of time. This next book, I feel like I'm just making an excuse to add it to the list because it is my absolute favorite series. Absolute favorite. So the books I'm gonna be showing you today aren't exactly my favorites. The only reason I can say it's a milestone is because it was really the first author I've encountered that inspired me to want to write myself, and that is the one, the only Lemony Snicket's series of unfortunate events. And right here I have my very favorite book by him, The End, which infuriated most people but made me cry and infuriated me. The weird part about this is I didn't even like the series until I read the last one. Honestly, they were so repetitive and they made me so angry constantly, but I stayed with them just because the narrator of this book was just so witty and fun and just so cynical. Like, for kids' books, this guy gets really dark, and I absolutely love that about it, and it just fed the morbidness that came from childhood me drawing crucifixions. And okay, but by the end of the series, I think you'll all know what I'm talking about. When I read the very last word of the book, did my first real emotions from it spring. I cried. I think I probably threw the book. I raged. I complained about it to my mom. I remembered that. And she was so confused, and I had to go back and explain absolutely everything, and she didn't care. No one cared. I went back, I reread this book just to see what other answers I could find, and then I went back again and I reread every single other book just to find more answers. If you don't know about A Series of Unfortunate Events, it's basically just about orphans. And they're just trying to get away from this horrible family member that wants to steal their fortune. And he just keeps wearing these ridiculous disguises that fool all of the other adults. And he just has scheme after scheme after scheme to get their fortune. And that's it. That's the entire plot of 13 books. And I'm not just saying that's the plot of the 13 books, like as an overarching plot. That is the plot of every single book. It has the exact same beginning, middle, end, beginning, middle, end. But like somewhere through it, even though it keeps infuriating you, the author, the narrator, Lemony Snicket of this just keeps you so invested because you just get little snippets of other things, of bigger plots, of like grander things, and you have to keep going with it because you have to find out, and you just, it destroys you. This book series completely destroys you because it brings up so many questions, so many, way too many, and you never think that they're going to be able to answer them all. And I don't think it's a spoiler to say that none of them are answered. Some of them are answered, but the important ones are not. But the important ones are not answered, and I still rage about this book. I read the series every single year. I read conspiracy forums just to get word. I have actually met the author. Best day of my life. Daniel Handler, if you're watching this, I'm in love with you. And if your wife wasn't there at that book signing, I definitely would have told you that, but I'm telling you that now. Anyways, Series of Unfortunate Events. I am done raving. This has just brought up way too many old emotions. I thought I was mature and was okay with and okay within myself. I'm gonna have to call my therapist again. Anyways, continuing on. So I started going to public school. Finally, I had access to a huge library, absolutely huge, compared to the one that I had before, because the one in my hometown was literally a little shed that I had read all the books from. But The best thing about going to public school was all of the books I had access to, and I just read and read and read all the time. Honestly, from middle school, not a lot stands out. I know I read and I loved at the time the Maximum Ride series by James Patterson. Ugh. Then high school came. Then being a teenager came, and all of the teen angst and embarrassment came with it. So, of course, I found the first book series that I ever really fangirled over in that way, and it's going to sound so cliche, but that makes sense because I was a teenager. So, that would be the Hunger Games series by Suzanne Collins. I remember this being the very first book I could actually talk about with friends because everybody read it at the time. Throughout school, I never had anyone who shared my reading tastes. Everyone read because they had to, not because they liked to. I still read because I liked to. See, I didn't think that reading for a grade made it any less fun. Honestly, it just made getting grades easier for me. I remember talking to my friends about it constantly. We fangirled. We got totally into the love triangles. I was Team PETA all the way. And we would theorize about the next book, wait and wait and wait. I remember whenever the movies came out, we all went to watch them together, screamed like, well, teenagers. And this is really the first book I was ever really allowed to let loose on, fangirl on. And it's weird because I haven't stopped fangirling over books since, even though nobody around me has read them. That's why I got a YouTube channel. Now, the next bits of my milestone aren't as exciting as that, it seems, but honestly, I got into reading the classics in high school whenever I kind of got fed up with a lot of the YA stuff. I'm so sorry. I hope YouTube does not kill me for saying that. I really started getting into classics whenever I picked up my very first one, and that was Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This one, I just remember resonating so much with me because I related to the leads. It was easy to read whenever I thought it was going to be ridiculously hard. It had such a lovely atmosphere and mystery to it. The characters were brooding, which my teenage self still related to. And honestly, it was just a very good read. There's parts I still go to every now and then just to reread. And that's what got me into branching out a bit in my tastes, because till then I've just mainly read like teen fiction, fantasy, that kind of stuff. And then this gave me a taste that there was something else out there, which leads to my next and most exciting milestone, which is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. To this day, this is my favorite book. I know most people say that they couldn't possibly pick a favorite book, or their favorite book probably changes every year because they've read so much. No, this is my favorite book. It's 1,500 pages of beautifulness. I was starting to take a lot of drama classes in high school and really get into musical theater, and I was getting into classics, so it was only natural that I would try to tackle this book. And I'm so glad I did. It took such a long time to read. Most people don't really like the classics because they might have like slow starts, these long-winded speeches, over-the-top descriptions, but I've realized that's what I really, really like in books, and Les Miserables was the first thing that made me realize that I love that Victor Hugo would go into the backstory of everything, because that really helped with the big reason why this book is such a milestone. This is what gave me my standard for character development. Never in any book I have ever read has there ever been so in-depth character development. It just passages and passages and passages just describing like the reasoning behind somebody saying like a sentence. Basically, the story is about the world's most dynamic character, Jean Valjean. He is a convict who wants to be a better person, and he strives to be a better person, and he builds this life for himself. And then you have the antagonist, Javert, who is a police officer who is absolutely obsessed with sending him back to jail because he broke his parole to become like a new man. He got a new identity, and Javert wants to send him back to prison because his views are very black and white. A person can either be good or bad, and they cannot change. And it's just a wonderful foil to his character. It is a story about redemption, and it's a story about love. And honestly, it's just such a beautiful story about humanity. It covers so many different characters and so many different walks of lives, and then just shows them all together in this beautiful, beautiful story that honestly has never made me so happy or so sad. It's my favorite book. I don't think that's ever going to change. The last one I wanted to talk about is what really got me into literary fiction. Until then, I had been reading either just classics or a lot of fantasy, or I'd go back and forth between that, and I never thought about just adult contemporary fiction. And I picked up this one. I honestly had never heard about it, and it's called The Opposite of Art. That one follows an artist who gets into a near-death experience, and he sees what he thinks is heaven. He goes completely off the grid, and he starts journeying, or he starts to go on this pilgrimage and starts going to different places to find out what it was that he saw, or if he can ever see it again. It takes a beautiful look into all different kinds of religions, philosophies, and just art. I remember the descriptions being beautiful. It had a very Siddhartha vibe to it for me, which also, if you haven't read, is fantastic. That's my boyfriend's favorite book. That's why I don't have the book here with me right now to show it to you, because I made him borrow it. If you like pilgrimage stories, that one really did it for me. And since then, I've just been looking for a lot of just literary fiction that looks like it's gonna have really good character studies. And that's kind of where I am right now. Like I said, I've been getting more into historical fiction. I haven't done a lot of that in the past. Really getting into Greek mythology, which is my next topic of discussion. I'm really excited about next week. If you're interested in Greek mythology at all, tune in. I'm not going to say anything else. Suspense, suspense, suspense. That is all for tonight. It is so late, and I am so tired, and it's a kind of world-weary tiredness that even talking about books cannot revive. With that, I'm going to go to bed, so you guys have a good night. I will try to as well. That's all I have to say. Awkward outro.